So it's really exciting to have everyone together. This is our 4th meetup now. Every time I think we have more people, which is really exciting. So thank you all for attending. Now, at the last meetup we had a few presentations. I hope people enjoyed the presentations. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it was fun. But I think we had too many, so this time we don't have as many presentations. So we just have 2, and the second one's going to be awesome. And I'm going to warm you up for that second one. So today, and they're both on psychological topics. We're not going to be talking about the Book of Abraham or the Book of Mormon. We're actually going to be talking about psychological topics that are maybe a bit higher level, a bit more interesting. So the presentation I've put together is about this question. What is the difference between an apologist and an apostate on a psychological level? So why could 2 people look at the same data about, say, Mormonism or Christianity or Islam generally and come to 2 different conclusions about whether or not it's true? Now, I just want to ask a quick question to warm everyone up. How many of you have spent time reading LDS apologetics? Not much. Simon's read more than anyone.
Waste of time.
Yeah. So one of the things that LDS apologists will say, and I'll speak about that in a second, is why is it that we know all of this stuff but we still believe? And you guys learn this stuff but you lose your faith. And that's used as a tool to launch a kind of ad hominem attack against people who move out. To say, you have done something wrong in your life, you've wanted to sin, etc. So I'll set that up and talk a bit about that. So let's begin. Wait, just a couple of qualifiers, right? I'm actually not trying to attack apologists, right? If you want to analyze their arguments, you should analyze them, and the merit, if there is any of those arguments, should be analyzed independently. I'm not trying to attack them as a source, right?
It's probably likely that we've all actually been apologists at some point.
I'll speak about that. Yeah, I'll speak about that. But that's actually very true. I was a member of Fair Mormon for 3 months, and I paid my dues, and I reviewed their content, and I even contributed. And I was in the mailing list, so I saw all the inbound questions, and in the internal mailing list where they started talking about all sorts of interesting stuff. So yeah, it's very interesting. But let's sit and use a few minutes of our life to watch Jesus speaking King James English, if you will. I don't know if the sound works on this. Alright.
Behold, the sower went forth to sow. And when he sowed, some seeds
This is
fell by
a
the
genuine
wayside.
fireside now.
The fowls came and devoured them up. Some fell upon stony places, where they had not much earth. And forthwith they sprung up, because they had no deepness of earth. And when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns sprung up and choked them. But others fell into good ground, and brought forth fruit. Some 100-fold, some 60-fold.
They were all just chilling on the boat
Who hath ears to hear, let him hear.
while he was preaching.
And no one was writing it down.
Why speakest thou unto them in parables?
Okay, I'm actually not going to finish the video because it's so boring. Have any of you seen this video before? You've probably, or you've seen. Okay, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the parable of the sower, right? Okay, the parable of the sower is often used as a tool by apologists to attack so-called apostates, because what they'll say is it's not that the seed was bad, but that your ground was barren. Okay, that's why we lose our faith. Because the seed is fine, but it fell on your ground, and that's why you lost faith, right?
Or that you hang out with thorns.
Yeah. You thorny people.
Don't look too thorny to me.
Yeah. So this is my summary of. Oopsie. Next slide. This is my summary of the parable. Blessed are the credulous. Okay. Those who hear something and believe it immediately without thinking critically about it. Okay. Right. So, this is a free license to attack people who leave the church, which I'll explain. Okay, I'm just going to skip that. So, what is it? What is the answer from our side of the debate as to the difference between apologists and apostates? Why do we see things differently? Of necessity, this answer has to be a psychological answer because the data is not the answer. The exposure to information is not the question, right? So, this is not a smear campaign. I'm just trying to answer this question. Let's speak about the parable of the airport. I'm going to tell everyone a quick story that hopefully will relate to all of you because we've all been there. Now, imagine for a second that you were born in the international arrivals department of the Sydney airport. Okay, unlucky you, right? And you grew up there, and your entire life you continued to hear stories of people who were arriving in Sydney, right? From all places around the world. And they keep talking about how awesome it is to come to Sydney, right? The weather is great. The people from the UK are saying how great the weather is, right? The people from the US are saying how wonderfully secular this place is, right? The people from Canberra, what do they say?
Back to Canberra?
Damn it, I'll know you.
The people from Canberra never arrived, so you never heard their story. And that's an important point, actually. So you're immersed in one narrative. You hear one story from many people about arriving in Sydney and how wonderful Sydney is. Okay, you become convinced that Sydney is the best place on the earth. Poor you. Okay, and then you grow up. Later on, at one point, you finally leave the Sydney airport and you go to the international departures terminal. So instead of watching people arriving, you go to the departures. And you hear people leaving, complaining about the house prices and moving to Canberra, right? Complaining about all of the different populations that live there, etc. And so you start to hear a conflicting narrative. And then you travel the world and you go to the US, you go to the UK, and everywhere you go, you hear stories of people who are arriving saying how awesome it is to arrive in that place, and people who are leaving saying how awesome it is to leave. And so your perspective is changed forever, because where you had abundant exposure to a single narrative before, suddenly now you hear that there are actual other stories to be told. So this is what I call the parable of the airport, and in a sense each of us is exactly like that. For most of us, we grew up in an Orthodox religion and we had abundant exposure to a single narrative, a single story. Now you hear all the converts saying how awesome it is to get baptized, and you hear all the apostles saying how awesome it is. And then eventually something happens. You start to hear conflicting narratives, right? At this point you have a choice whether or not to realize that you yourself were in a box or that you grew up with a single narrative, right? So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about. So that's these slides. Da-da-da-da. Right. So the core message of the parable of the airport is, by traveling around the world, you or our friend or whoever was able to see beyond themselves. So they were able to see that what they grew up with was just stories from one particular side. And then they could perceive that there are other stories, and those other stories also make sense within their own context. And so they were able to see outside the box. So the argument I'm going to make about the difference between apologists and apostates is that apostates have been able to gain a level of self-awareness about the fact that, hey, maybe I wasn't born into the one and only true religion. Maybe I wasn't the winner of the worldview lottery. Right? Maybe my parents didn't actually know what they were talking about. Right? Sometimes you have to realize those things in order to come out of the box. And so that's the parable of the airport. So what about apologists? Have apologists heard about people leaving the LDS Church? Yes, they have. They've heard the people leaving the Sydney airport. Have apologists heard the people entering and leaving other religions? Not as much. I don't think so as much. Then why are they different? Like why have they heard the same information, but they're different? Does everyone remember this scene from The Matrix? Okay. Does anyone remember what Morpheus says in this scene? I can show you the door, but you have to walk through it. You remember that? Right. So when it comes to a realization that allows you to see beyond yourself, see beyond the confines of your own personal subjective experience. You can show people the data. You can show them the Book of Abraham, the Book of Mormon. You can show them all of these contradictions, but you can't force them to have an insight that their experience is just one story among many other stories. So this is the sort of Morpheus idea. You can show someone that, but you can't force them to realize something. You can show someone the data, but you can't make them see beyond the confines of their own experience. You can't force them to have an insight into themselves. So as a side note, religious experiences play a key role in this because people cling very tenuously to the experiences that they've had, tenaciously, to the experiences that they've had. I know this is true because, we were just watching a video earlier with Jake Hilton, because Jesus and 4 angels put their hands on me and I felt them and they were tangible hands, right? What do you say to someone like that to show them the contradictions? It's extremely difficult. It's an insight that you cannot just force on them. Right. So let's have a quick competition. I'm going to share some thoughts about apologists, but we're going to have a quick competition. Who can name these apologists?
Mason
Bushman.
is one.
Wait, so this is Bushman. This is Patrick Mason.
Givens, Peterson,
Peterson, Daniel Peterson,
Meldrum.
Meldrum. Who's that? Anyone know?
Yeah.
Is it a priesthood thing or where are the chicks?
I was going to comment at the end of this, did you notice they're also white and delightsome? Right. This,
Fair, isn't it?
yes, this is the president of Fair Mormon, Scott Gordon.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. This is Rodney Meldrum, we mentioned him. He's a young earth creationist, DNA evidence thing dude. This is Richard Bushman, probably the most liberal, progressive apologist out there. This is Patrick Mason. He's also quite liberal, progressive, but still, yeah. This is Daniel Peterson. Not a lot of people like this guy. Yeah. I forgot who this is. I think it's Terrell Gibbons.
Yeah,
Gibbons?
Gibbons.
We
Yeah.
don't have his wife up there. She's
That's true.
pretty good too.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah,
I
Terrell
apologize.
Fiona.
I apologize. I didn't know. I didn't
You?
know. That's Hugh Nibley.
Oh.
Yeah. We've all heard the name,
Yes.
but he is actually that old, or he was.
Is he still alive?
No.
No. Okay. Does anyone know that person? This is actually less known, but I know him very well. Truman G. Manson.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I said, they're all very white and delightsome. There's a whole club of apologists that are in different angles. Right? Here's some thoughts about apologists, and again, you can openly share. So this is my thesis, right? I believe apologists are stuck in an eddy of self-actualization. So if you imagine self-actualization is like a river that's flowing, and all of us in different dimensions of our lives, we're flowing down this river and we're progressing as human beings. We're learning things, we're overcoming challenges, we're becoming wiser, right? But you all know what an eddy is, of course. It's a little whirlpool that happens on the side of a river due to the way the water interacts with the objects around there. And so as you're flowing down this river, you can get caught up in this eddy and you basically just keep going in circles, right? Now, it's my thesis that apologists are fundamental believers who started going down the path of learning that all of us had, but then they got caught in a kind of eddy at that point. And that eddy exactly revolves around this insight of the box, realizing that my experience isn't the only experience, my story isn't the only story. And so some can be stuck there for a week, for months, for years, and some for a lifetime, right? And the reason I have this belief is ironically because of my own story, but because I was stuck in this same position. And I think that was the point that you raised earlier, is all of us at some point or another on the way out spent some time reading apologetics. And that lasted for a certain period of time. But eventually, you're going around in this eddy, and some of us, something happens with our lives, in our psychology, and somehow we dislodge from that eddy and we keep going down the path of self-actualization. And I don't know exactly what that is that happens, but I think it has a lot to do with perceiving that I'm in a box, that my beliefs are this box, and there's another Muslim over there who's in another box, and everyone else has their own box that they're in, but they can't perceive that they're in this box, right? And so this eddy itself, this getting stuck in this whirlpool has nothing to do with the data. It has nothing to do with the availability of information, and everything to do with the people who are interpreting that information. The data, it couldn't be more obvious. You've probably heard that the Mormonism is the second most obviously fraudulent religion, right? The first is Scientology. Right? I don't know if you've ever heard that, but then I've heard people say, people are looking at it from the outside and they're saying this is so obviously fraudulent, right?
That's why everyone makes fun of Mormons, right?
yeah, the Book of Mormon musical and so on. So it's so obviously wrong, it's so obviously fraudulent from an objective point of view. So what is it that makes us miss that insight? It's exactly the fact that we're in this box, right? We're stuck in this box and we can't realize that, hey, I didn't win the lottery of birth, right? I wasn't magically born into the right religion, and so someone else wasn't either.
Can I just say that, Shawnee? I think that's a really good analogy, because when you're stuck in an eddy like that, you're actually still moving. And I think that's part of the perception that I'm still going. The perception is when you're in the eddy that you're actually still going forward. But I think that's a really good part of the analogy, that's not the case. What you're actually doing is you're going in circles and you keep repeating, I know this is true, or blah, 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 whatever the things that you repeat. And that becomes self-fulfilling. Yes, I'm still moving forward.
Yes.
But to anyone else looking in, all you're doing is going in circles. And I think you're right when you say that for those of us that have perhaps speared out of that eddy, it took us perhaps just looking at maybe others that were stuck in it, or ourselves, and saying, I actually want to get out of this trajectory and find out what's actually right, rather than reinforcing what I think I know is right.
Yeah. And part of that is, as you said, I mean, part of my research was not just researching Mormonism, because I believe that apologists, I think one of the solutions to this is actually to make people study other religions. Because by studying other religions, you see that there are other boxes. So part of my research, I didn't just study Mormonism. I studied other religions, their claims, and their apologetics. And so then what you see is you see the other eddies. And you see what I'm going to talk about in a moment, which is motivated reasoning. You see that apologetic reasoning is actually extremely poor on a reasoning scale, as someone like Simon will tell you, having interacted with it extensively. That's a great, thank you for that comment. So I think you're all familiar with the 5 stages of grief. This is, again, a psychological thing. And in the beginning of the 5 stages, the first stage is normal functioning, and that is shock and denial, right? You function as normal, but you're in a state of shock and denial. And so notice normal functioning is, I'm not in denial, right? I'm not denying that, that the church is false, right? The feelings of going down the dark road, aka starting the stages of grief, are interpreted as losing the spirit, right? So I have a good anecdote. The ex-bishop of our ward, he actually started doing this research online. He started reading about all these conflicting things, and he started to have very bad feelings. We all know that's cognitive dissonance. We've all experienced that emotion. So he goes to his bishop at the time and he says, I'm concerned about this and this and this. And his bishop says to him, how do you feel? Right? How do you feel about the stuff that you read? When you're reading that anti-Mormon stuff, how do you feel? He says, oh, I feel terrible, right? Well, that's you losing the spirit, right? That's the Holy Ghost telling you to stay away. When in actual fact, all that is beginning the stages of grief. It's that cognitive dissonance feeling that we have, that sinking feeling that, wow, could it really all be fraudulent, right? Could it really all be fake? Right? So I believe that, this is my thesis, that apologists are sort of stuck in the phase 1 of the 5 stages of grief, right? They're stuck, and if you read these words, avoidance, confusion, fear, numbness, blame, right? These are all the behaviors that you see are typical of apologists. They're stuck in that eddy, they think they're moving forward, but actually they're just denying it, and they're continuing to deny it. In a sense, deceiving themselves.
And most people in that picture are worrying about their income.
Yeah.
It's one of the first things they worry about.
Yeah.
If they're employed by BYU, they know that their career's over, they lose their income.
Yep.
Givens, they lose their book sales, they lose their the adoration they get whenever they rock up at any church. Or
Yeah. They're like rock stars, right? Apologists.
But it's mostly money.
Yeah. So that increases, that just adds more pressure to that cognitive dissonance, right? it makes more conflict of interest.
Someone actually mentioned that about, I think Sherry Jew, I think, had a recent book out where she mentioned some things along the line of sort of people leaving the church and whatever, and the comment was that, well, she's she's selling a book through Deseret Books. She owns half of Deseret Books. It's in her interest to talk about staying in the church, at least from a financial perspective, if not anything else.
Yeah. So that adds that's another variable among the many variables that keeps them stuck in that stage. How many of you are familiar with James Fowler's Stages of Faith? I think many of you will be, because this is again one of the psychological things we research, right? So James Fowler, a famous psychologist, studied religious faith extensively, and he describes different states. Unfortunately, this Zoom is terrible. I apologize. I'll have to kneel down and read it. But he describes what we call a faith crisis as you go from stage 3 to 4 to 5. Right? Stage 3 is orthodox belief. Stage 1 and 2 are basically childhood belief. Stage 3, orthodox belief. Stage 4 is what we'd call a faith crisis. Stage 5 is basically what all of us are in today, if we've recovered well. And it's interesting that in the actual description of James Fowler's stages of belief, it uses the word box. So it says, of stage 4, which we call faith crisis, it says, this is a tough stage, often begun in young adulthood, when people start seeing outside the box and realizing that there are other boxes. They begin to critically examine their beliefs and on their own, and often become disillusioned with their form of faith. Ironically, stage 3 people, that's orthodox believers, usually think that stage 4 people have become backsliders, when in reality they've actually started moving forward. Right? And so I just highlighted there that they use the language of boxes as well. Stage 3 is being in the religious box, not perceiving that you're in this box. Stage 4 is, as you start to do research, something happens, something clicks, and you realize that you're in a box. That's how you get out of that eddy of apologetics, right? So again, this is how stage 3. Stage 3 are apologists that are, in this case, talk about apologists. They are stuck in stage 3, and they're looking at the people in stage 4 and saying, look, you're having a tough time. It's because you've lost the spirit, you want to sin, you've lost the guidance of God, etc. There are many ways that they can say it. So, how are we going on time? Okay. Is everyone still interested? Okay. So I want to, if you're interested and you want to have some fun, I have some examples of this lack of self-awareness, which I find very ironic and very interesting. So this is Scott Gordon speaking about Rodney Meldrum, which is very entertaining. For those of you who don't know who they are, it doesn't really matter. Okay.
And finally, this fourth website and book on DNA evidence in the Book of Mormon geography has become very popular. I know it's even going around here in Sweden and Norway. This man is still a member. I've spoken with him for many hours. This man's claim is that he believes the Book of Mormon took place inside the boundaries of the United States. I personally don't believe his theory fits with the description of what is in the Book of Mormon. Much of his material on Book of Mormon artifacts sound enticing, but I believe they're poorly researched, because he uses known fakes and forgeries to prove his point.
Book of Abraham.
He sells bus tours to his Book of Mormon locations, and he's quite a good salesman. Now, my opinion is he is completely free to believe and even to teach what he believes about the Book of Mormon geography location. Because the Book of Mormon geography location is not a revealed subject. The brethren have stated it has not been revealed.
Simon loves that.
But the problem I have, and I've told him this,
not as if Joseph Smith said anything about the Book of Mormon geography.
Claims it is a revealed subject through the prophet Joseph Smith. And he has implied that anyone who doesn't believe his claims are in a state of apostasy. You are not following Joseph Smith. And these apostates, these so-called apostates, include pretty much all of the BYU professors, the people who write the Sunday school manuals, and even the apostles, although the apostles are just deceived by the BYU scholars. I bring him up. I was a little nervous about bringing him up because he's still, I'm right, and everyone who doesn't believe as I do is bad attitude is dangerous to himself and to others.
Sounds like a fair Mormon.
So giving you these more specific examples may
Okay, that's the point. Right. So
That's right.
this is extremely ironic, and this is exactly what I mean by lack of self-awareness.
Yeah.
Right? Because the irony of everything he's saying is completely lost on him. Right? And so this, especially the I'm right, you're wrong, or everyone who disagrees with me is in a state of apostasy. Fair Mormon spends a lot of time attacking people with questions who are sincere. Right? I've seen that because I've been on the mailing lists, and I've seen the questions coming in, and I've seen how they respond to them. And they first respond by researching who the person is, looking up their history, and then they go and say, well, I've seen responses where someone asks, hi, I have this question about blah, 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 blah. And the response will be, well, you already know the answer to that question. You are just trying to blah, 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 blah. So it's really silly and ironic. But it illustrates that point, lack of self-awareness of how ironic they are. So again, can't take a joke about themselves kind of situation. Here's another example, if I may. If we still have time. Here's an example that a little experiment I ran on Facebook. It was a lot of fun. Okay. I sent this message to my religiously believing friends. You can ignore that. I just said, imagine you met an ex-Muslim one day. You ask him how or why he decided to leave Islam. Imagine he said to you, I came to realize over years of introspection and research that the only reason I believed in Islam and took the arguments of Islam to be particularly cogent, that means convincing, was because I was brought up as a child from the cradle to believe in Allah, the Quran, and Muhammad, and discovered that the common arguments in favor of these things being true were actually not logically powerful or consistent. So I asked, this is to my believing Christian and Mormon friends, I asked, would you feel like this person had struck a deep insight? Right? Would you feel that they had perceived that they were in a box and somehow managed to see outside of it? Would you feel that they had somehow managed to be more objective about their own beliefs? Right? How do you think, because the reason I asked that to my believing friends is I actually didn't know how I would have answered that question. I couldn't put myself in the head of a believer to answer that question.
You have to say yes.
Well, that's what we say now.
Yes.
Right? But I'll show you the response. So one of my friends, he's a really good sport. I'm not going to name him. I'm just going to take his response. He was a really good guy, believing Mormon. This is what he said. One of the things I might think is, it sounds like this individual, at the moment at least, is relying to a large extent on logic to determine their beliefs. That sounds like a terrible thing to do, right? Don't use logic to determine your beliefs. I may also wonder how much value they place on empirical evidence. Question mark, question mark. So it's, basically my point about this response is, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. It seems to just be a little bit of mumbo jumbo. It doesn't seem very clear. Whereas I think that this question, as you said, is a very straightforward question. It's a very simple thing. We're talking about realizing that you're in a box, right? Would you think that some other religious person had realized they're in a box? So what I'm trying to illustrate by this is, I don't think that anyone in a religious box realizes that other people are also in religious boxes, even if they're in a different box. So when they see a Muslim or a Jehovah's Witness, they also don't realize those people are in a box. Because if they did, they would see themselves in a box.
I don't know that I agree with that.
You don't agree?
No, and to be honest, the reason why I say that is because I've heard a lot of very, very shameless criticism and mocking of people with other religious beliefs. Like, how do they believe that? It's like ridiculous, That,
right.
And I think that response is actually a defensiveness, perceiving that the real intent of your questions to perhaps to get them to maybe question their own beliefs, and the defensiveness is actually speaking there, not
right. True. Sorry, maybe I should qualify that. Yeah. You're right.
One of the first things I learned at uni, when I went to uni when I was 35, is that about worldview.
Last year.
It blew my mind. The concept of worldview blew my mind. It just shook me up, and that's where it all started. All my questioning started from that point.
Yeah, that's a great example. So worldview is like the glasses that you wear. from which you perceive and
Well,
interpret
not even
the world.
glasses. The way it was described to me is if we're all fish and it's the water we swim in.
Yes, yeah.
So you can't
It's
even
extremely
take them off.
immersive. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But when you, but for people who have self-awareness, they are aware that they have a worldview, and they're aware of their own biases as a result of their worldview. So let's say I'm a left-wing, liberal, atheist. At least I should be aware of what those things do to how I interpret reality. I should be able to see that I will interpret incoming events and information through the lenses of my worldview. That's exactly coming out of the box is that process, right?
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, as I could think that there would be believing members of the church that would read that and say, maybe this person is being inspired by the Spirit to the truth.
Yes.
And so do I feel that this person had struck a deep insight? My word.
Yeah.
Maybe they're...
Let's get the missionaries there.
They are, because the truth is not within Islam. It is within the LDS faith. And so it could very well be that is consistent with our beliefs as members of the church, that person is going down that road. So, maybe they were in a box or whatever, but maybe they're on the way over here.
I think another variable to consider, Shawn, is that this is on your Facebook, your friends. They know the situation you're in. They're thinking that you're trying to catch them out. And what answer can I give to respond to Shawn so that I don't get caught out here? Because if I say, yes, this person's in a box, he's going to stay straight back to me. But you're in a box too.
You're right. And maybe I was a bit mean by putting this up in that way, or maybe it's a tricky situation to play. All I responded to my friend is I said thanks. I didn't continue the discussion at all. I just said thanks for responding, because no one else responded.
I think too that there's a real chance that people, like what you're describing, is they'll say, no, it's really easy to see that person's in a box because what they believe isn't true. But I'm not in a box. It's just what I believe is true.
But sorry, maybe I said that incorrectly. People do tend to be able to. It's that what Jesus parable about the mote in your own eye kind of thing.
Right? So I'm in the right box.
Yes, that's right. And they're not.
I might be in a box, but I'm in the right one.
Everyone else to come into the right box.
He's in a sort of a bit wrong sort of square one. He's on the way in.
Boxes don't matter when I've got the truth.
They're in a box, they're in a box, but not in the same way that you're in a box, or not in the same kind of box that you're in.
I'm in the right box. But it's sort of the analogy falls apart at that point, because my point of saying that you're in a box is actually realizing that it's not the right one. It's sort of the same inside. And that's cool. Yes. Here's a William James quote. William James was a famous psychologist who studied religious experiences. He has a fantastic book that's extremely thick and difficult to read, which is called The Variety of Religious Experiences. I only made it through about a quarter of it, but this quote happened to be in the first quarter. And it's a really good quote. He said, "The truth is that in the metaphysical and religious sphere, articulate reasons are cogent for us only when our inarticulate feelings of reality have already been impressed in favor of the same conclusion." Right. He also goes on to say that due to this, he says, no matter what logical arguments you make, be they ever so superior, they won't have an effect. Because people have had inarticulate feelings of reality that are impressed in support of a certain view, certain conclusion. Therefore, the articulate reasons sound cogent. Cogent means logically powerful or convincing, right? So what that means is people who hear apologists actually think their arguments are powerful. Why? Because they have already been impressed in the same conclusion, in that view. So this is why apologists see their arguments as persuasive. To realize the flaw in our inarticulate feelings is to see beyond oneself. A sure path to apostasy. That's to see that you're in the box, right? So for me, sorry, this is just a side point. For me, dismantling the logic of apologetic arguments, seeing beyond myself, those are two sides of the same coin. And I realized that if I could believe what Fair Mormon says or their apologetics, then I could believe what the Muslim apologetic says as well, or what the Scientologists say, or anyway, I could believe anything, right? Cool. This is a case of this is from an article. This is a case of what scientists refer to as motivated reasoning, a phenomenon in which our unconscious motivations, desires, and fears shape the way we interpret information. Some pieces of information feel like our allies. We want them to win. We want to defend them. And other pieces of information are the enemy, and we want to shoot them down. That's why I call motivational reasoning soldier mindset. There's a really, really good article about motivated reasoning that you can
It's like how people interpret answers to their prayers. Yes. If it's what you want to hear, then that's exactly what I,
Yeah.
It's always to confirm what you think.
Yes, it always confirms.
Yeah.
Also, in a book, Combating, called Mind Control, he speaks about all signs point to yes. Like in any religious viewpoint, all the signs point to yes. All the signs point to it's true. There's no condition under which it's not true. So I just found this meme, I thought it was funny, so I put it here. There will come a time when Muslim apologetics appeal to something else than the Quran, but it is not this day. Sorry, I found this randomly when I was Googling memes about apologetics. So, just wrapping up, I want to encourage empathy and compassion towards apologists. This is both the Fair Mormon types and also the everyday believer types of apologists. Really, they're stuck at the edge of a dark road, and they're very fearful to go down it. All of us were there. We know exactly what that's like. It's scary to exit that eddy. It's scary to go out into that dark road. The one good thing I can say about apologists, and I'm not going to say too many good things, but the one good thing is at least they get into the trenches of a debate. Right? Compare that to, say, the leaders of religions. They avoid the trenches completely. So apologists are at least willing to discuss and debate issues, and that's an important part of the puzzle. Right? Apologists are often treated much like a spouse who's being abused. So the relationship, for example, between the LDS Church and Fair Mormon is very much like an abusive spouse. Right? They sort of order them around. They don't appreciate them. When they do something, when they need them, they'll call on them and write an essay and then send them back or fire them, whatever. So it's kind of abusive. It is, right? Yeah, it is, right? The church keeps their organizations at an arm's length, calling them when needed. Like, that's exactly what they do to apologists, right? So, and we're all just bipeds on the same rocks. We're all Homo sapiens. We're walking around a small speck of dust in space, right? We're all in the same team in some ways. So they're probably just doing the best that they know. Some cases could be exceptions. So, and here's an interesting point that I just want to end with. Do any of you know of any psychologists in the top ranks of the church? As far as I know, they're all business people, sales people, and heart surgeons, right? Lawyers. The Lord's lawyers.
You're on the card.
Yeah, so business people and lawyers. But you very rarely, I don't think, if ever, see psychologists who make it to the top rank. I think that's an interesting phenomenon. I think there's a reason for that. And I think that's the same reason that certain people exit. Cool. Yeah. This is just my final slide, sorry. Are any of us actually fully self-aware? This is another question, right? So in some way, coming out of that eddy in this era of our life was an increase of self-awareness in one dimension. But are any of us fully self-aware of ourselves? No. We do things that hurt other people. We offend people. We don't know our weaknesses. We don't perceive them. We can usually see other people's weaknesses better than we see our own. Right? So I'm not pulling a Jesus here. I'm not saying that, right? Because he has this verse that says, "Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote of thy brother's eye." This is an interesting concept. I'm not saying that you should never criticize anyone else. That you should be completely self-aware before you can talk to someone else about their weaknesses or issues. But the argument I'm making is that we are not all fully self-aware. Some of the issues that we experience on a day-to-day basis are because of who we ourselves are. do we realize that some of our troubles are due to our own patterns or our own psychology? This is something that happens. So what I'm advocating for is empathy. No one is fully out of the box in every respect, right? We're all in the box in some respect. And so we have reason to have compassion and empathy for others. So this is my solution: thoughtful, respectful dialogue. One of the problems with apologetics is it's often very one-way communication. There's straw manning of critical arguments. So we should share stories, have thoughtful dialogue, and always maintain a measure of empathy and compassion. Thank you. Any afterthoughts before we go to the next presentation?
I think you make a good point with that last bit, where really we should be speaking with anyone in any context with a measure of empathy and compassion. I mean, no matter if it's for the church, whether we're talking to a pair of missionaries that just knocked on our door, whether we're talking with our family members or a stranger on the street, we should always be talking with respect, because we don't know their story, we don't know where they are. We may think we do, but we don't. And I think you're always going to be able to connect to people on a better level if you speak with them with respect and compassion. And I think no matter what, that can be used in every context.
Could I just say too, so I did some training this week. As most of you know, I'm a police officer, and we were talking about the burden of proof. And so if you get charged with a criminal offence, the prosecution, the police, has to prove that you committed that offence to a court beyond reasonable doubt. If you're in a civil court and somebody owes you money, or there's other types of argument that are non-criminal, the burden of proof is beyond reasonable doubt. So that is, if you want to think about it mathematically, 51% versus 49 is the minimum. And that training that I did this week sort of has highlighted a bit to me here about the apologetic argument. So if I'm a fully believing member of the church, then by definition I've had an experience that has proved to me beyond a reasonable doubt that this church is true. That's by definition, by being there. Anything else subsequent to that on the timeline, all that really needs to do is be on the balance of probabilities. So, when you look at these apologetic arguments that really don't go anywhere to proving anything beyond a reasonable doubt, they might prove something on the balance of probabilities, maybe. And so that's the burden of proof that I see that they aim to meet, that, look, there's probably doubt in this circumstance, there's probably something to think about, we're not quite sure, the Lord hasn't revealed it. All those things go towards proving something to you on the balance of probability. And for people who are faithful members of the church, as I look at it, that is all you need.
That's effective.
You don't need something to say, here's an absolute slam dunk on the Book of Abraham, because you ain't going to get it. But you're going to get something, and I read their stuff today when we were talking before, they probably put enough doubt in there where you could go on the balance of probabilities. And I see that that's probably what they pitch to, and that's probably what they get to, and that's probably all they need to do.
For sure, because I think that even a lot of the arguments that are, the possibility that actually holds, that
questionable.
happen. It's like, well, and it's statistically insignificant. But the fact that there is a technical possibility out there is enough.
That is sufficient for people who believe that they've got something beyond reasonable doubt.
They throw Pascal's wager out of them.
Yes. Good old Pascal's wager.
If it is, then you're better off following it, because there's a chance it could be. Then I've had people say that, to literally to me say, I've made the choice because there's too much to lose otherwise. I'd rather do it.
For every problem.
Like
there's 100 problems.
And all ways.
Now we're getting into taking apart subject arguments.
You're a statistician, you looked at it all, you figure
Everyone here has done it. I have comments, but I think we should just go to the next presentation.
All right.
I mean, look, maybe one final comment. Never mind. I was going to speak with Luke, but that's okay. All right. Do you have the USB?